In the summer of 1876, a massive village of over 7,000 people stretched for miles along the banks of the Greasy Grass River in Montana. It was one of the largest gatherings of humanity ever seen on the North American continent. To the United States Army scouts watching from the ridges, it looked like a disorganized camp of wandering tribes. But inside that village, a sophisticated military alliance was forming that would soon hand the American military its most stinging defeat of the 19th century. The Lakota, the Northern Cheyenne, and the Arapaho had set aside old rivalries to face a single existential threat. This was not a random act of violence, but the peak of a century of intertribal diplomacy. Across the continent, from the deserts of New Mexico to the woodlands of Ohio, native nations were using secret codes, modified technology, and spiritual movements to build a resistance that the industrial world never saw coming. History often teaches us about the frontier as a series of isolated battles between a growing nation and small, scattered groups of people. We are told the story of a doomed race that simply could not keep up with modern progress. But the reality found in tribal oral histories and military archives tells a different story. It is a story of strategic sovereignty. Native leaders were not just reactive, they were geopolitical masters. They formed complex confederacies that leveraged spiritual revivalism and cutting-edge modifications to Western weaponry. They used logistical systems like the knotted cords of the Pueblo and the high-speed mirror signals of the Comanche to coordinate movements across hundreds of miles of trackless wilderness. To understand how these alliances worked, we have to go back to 1680, to an event that predates the United States entirely. The Pueblo Revolt remains perhaps the most successful indigenous uprising in history. For nearly a century, the Pueblo people of New Mexico had lived under the brutal Spanish encomienda system. Their religion was outlawed, and their leaders were publicly flogged. One of those leaders was a Tewa man named Popey. He realized that the autonomous Pueblo villages could never defeat the Spanish military individually. They needed total synchronization. Popey developed a brilliant logistical solution for a world without telephones or written letters. He sent runners out to every village carrying strips of deer hide with knots tied in them. Each knot represented one day. Every morning, the local leaders would untie one knot. When the final knot was reached, it was the signal to strike. This countdown timer allowed geographically dispersed communities to rise up at the exact same moment on August 10, 1680. The sudden coordinated assault was so overwhelming that the Spanish were forced to retreat all the way to El Paso. The Pueblo secured their independence for 12 years and ensured that their culture would survive into the modern day. As the frontier moved into the 19th century, the scale of these alliances grew even larger. In the Ohio Valley, a Shawnee leader named Tecumseh and his brother, Tenskwatawa, known as the Prophet, began building a pan-Indian confederacy. Tecumseh was a charismatic orator who spoke multiple languages and earned the respect of his enemies for his humanity in war. He argued that the land belonged to all tribes communally and that no single chief had the right to sell it. He saw the American policy of negotiating with individual tribes as a tactic to dissolve native sovereignty piece by piece. While Tecumseh handled the politics, his brother provided the spiritual gravity. Tenskwatawa had once been an alcoholic who was considered a failure by his people. But after a near-death experience, he emerged as a powerful shaman preaching a return to traditional ways. The turning point for their alliance came in 1806. Tenskwatawa predicted a total solar eclipse, using the event to humiliate future President William Henry Harrison. Modern historians often claim he stole this knowledge from a farmer's almanac, but tribal traditions and the study of ancient mounds suggest it may have come from deep-seated indigenous astronomical observation. Regardless of how he knew, the miracle worked. Warriors from the Potawatomi, Kickapoo, Sauk, and Ojibwe flocked to their cause. During the War of 1812, this alliance partnered with the British. Their psychological warfare and tactical support led to the surrender of Detroit and several other American outposts. At its height, Tecumseh's dream was the creation of a permanent sovereign indigenous state that would have forever changed the map of North America. However, these alliances were often fragile and could be torn apart from the inside. The Red Stick War of 1813 is a perfect example of how external pressure could trigger a civil war within a single nation. The Muskogee Creek people split into two factions. The Lower Creeks chose to adopt the American civilization program, moving toward a market economy and a centralized government. The Upper Creeks, or Red Sticks, embraced Tecumseh's call for traditionalism. The United States saw this internal division as an opportunity. By siding with the nationalist Lower Creeks and the Cherokee, Andrew Jackson was able to decimate the Red Stick resistance at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. The irony of this alliance was bitter. After the war was won, the Treaty of Fort Jackson forced both the friendly and hostile Creeks to cede 23 million acres of land to the United States. That is an area roughly the size of the state of Indiana. It served as a harsh lesson. In the struggle for the frontier, an alliance with the government did not always guarantee your survival. Further west on the southern plains, a different kind of alliance dominated for nearly a century. The Comanche and the Kiowa formed a union around 1790 that created a high-speed empire known as the Comancheria. The Comanche were the undisputed masters of the horse. Their military doctrine was built on extreme mobility and what historians call calculated violence. A Comanche warrior began training in infancy. By age 5, boys could saddle their own ponies. By their teens, they could hang off the side of a galloping horse using a protective rope loop around the animal's neck. This allowed them to use the horse's body as a shield while firing arrows or rifles from under the neck. The Comanche also utilized sophisticated technology for communication. They used mirror signals to coordinate attacks in concurrent circles, swarming an enemy from all sides while remaining nearly impossible to hit. They knew every hidden water source in the trackless grass of the Staked Plains. During the American Civil War, they were so effective that they pushed white settlements back over 100 miles along the Texas frontier. They used the environment as a weapon, leading pursuers into dead zones where the soldiers' horses would collapse from thirst while the Comanche remained perfectly supplied. One of the most interesting aspects of these conflicts is how native warriors hacked Western technology. They didn't just use European guns, they modified them for their specific needs. Warriors across the Great Lakes and the plains created what were known as blanket guns. They would cut the barrels of their rifles down to 12 or 18 inches. These shortened weapons were easy to hide under a blanket or maneuver in a cramped canoe or on a moving horse. While they lost long-range accuracy, they became devastating tools for close-quarters combat. Even the way they repaired their weapons was unique. You may have seen old rifles in museums studded with brass tacks. While many collectors think these were just decorations, the tacks were often used to reinforce stocks that had cracked in the extreme weather of the frontier. Warriors would also use specific patterns, like a 5-point star or a sunburst, as a form of personal identification. It was the 19th century version of a serial number. When the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho gathered at the Little Bighorn in 1876, they were using every one of these traditional and adapted strategies. This alliance was not a permanent government, but a moving village brought together by the gold rush in the Black Hills. Sitting Bull provided the spiritual vision, claiming he saw soldiers falling into camp like grasshoppers. Crazy Horse and Chief Gall provided the tactical coordination. A detail that is rarely mentioned in standard history books is how close this alliance came to falling apart in the heat of battle. 5 Arapaho warriors were nearly killed by their Lakota allies because they were mistaken for Army scouts. It was only the quick thinking of Cheyenne Chief Two Moons that saved them. This moment highlights just how tenuous these coalitions were. They were held together by a shared threat, but the cultural differences and old grudges were always just beneath the surface. The victory at the Greasy Grass was a tactical masterclass. George Armstrong Custer's 7th Cavalry was not just defeated, it was destroyed. The Lakota and Cheyenne lost only 32 men, while every man in Custer's immediate command was killed. The alliance used the ravines and rolling hills to funnel the soldiers into positions where they could not support one another. However, the victory was short-lived. The shock of the defeat led to an intensified military campaign that forced almost all the participating tribes onto reservations within 5 years. For a long time, many of the details of these battles were kept secret. The Cheyenne, for example, maintained a 100-year silence about certain events at the Little Bighorn. It wasn't until 2016 that some of these cultural protocols were finally shared. One such secret involved the soldier coat dress. After the battle, Cheyenne women salvaged the blue wool coats of the fallen soldiers to create ceremonial dresses. This was a powerful way of reclaiming the tools of their oppressors. But because elders feared the American government would see the dresses as a sign of continued hostility, they were hidden away for 4 generations. The history of these alliances shows us that the people of the Old West were far more than the savages portrayed in 19th century newspapers. Those archives often use dehumanizing language to justify the seizure of land, ignoring the fact that men like Tecumseh or Pope were behaving as sovereign heads of state protecting their borders. They were innovators who saw the potential in new technology and the power in ancient traditions. When we look at a map of the frontier today, we see the lines drawn by the winners of those wars. But if you look closer, you can still see the shadows of these great confederacies. You see them in the survival of the Pueblo culture in New Mexico, the influence of the Comanche on light cavalry tactics, and the enduring legacy of the Pan-Indian movement. These alliances weren't just about winning a battle, they were about the fundamental right to exist and the belief that even the most disparate groups can find common ground when their way of life is on the line. The story of the American West is often told through the eyes of the people moving from east to west, but for the people already there, the story was about holding on to the center. It was about using every tool available, spiritual, tactical, and diplomatic, to ensure that their children would know who they were. From the knotted strings of 1680 to the shortened rifles of the 1870s, the history of intertribal alliances is a testament to indigenous ingenuity and the enduring power of collaborative resistance. Looking back at the strategic use of the knotted strings during the Pueblo Revolt, do you think such a low-tech but highly coordinated system could ever be replicated in a modern military conflict? Let me know in the comments below.